What is your strategy? Is it aligned with the goals of the business? Do you have a roadmap to guide you to the desired end state? If you want some help answering these questions, stick with me as we walk through them together. Welcome back, everyone. Last time we discussed program governance, and one of the ways to achieve proper governance is by employing a strategy. But what does that mean exactly? Today I'm going to break this down into 3 key areas so you can develop a strategy that works for you and your organization. Mind you, this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, but it's a good start, and some key areas to focus on if you're unsure how to get started. One of the most important elements of an information security strategy is to align with the goals and objectives of the business. To implement security in such a way that conflicts with the needs of the business is tantamount to security suicide. As an information security manager, you already have your work cut out for you to foster a positive attitude towards security. Don't make it more difficult for yourself. So, to successfully align with the needs of the business, first you have to know what the objectives of the business are. This is where forging those relationships comes in handy, because you'll want to collaborate with not only C-level executives, but also managers of the individual business lines, departments, and so on, so their goals are well understood. Because the primary goal of information security is to manage risk to an acceptable level, sometimes achieving this goal, or mitigating risk, can conflict with the ultimate business goal. So you'll want to align your goals of achieving an acceptable level of risk with that of the business. Stay with me and I'll provide some real-world examples of those goals and how to avoid potential conflict. Okay, so you have your goals, and you have the goals of the business. Now what? It's time for strategy. This is the part that I think many organizations struggle with. How do I create a strategy? What does that even mean? Creating an information security strategy involves developing a comprehensive plan to protect an organization's information assets from various threats and risks. Okay, so that's like the literal definition of an information security strategy. So what does that mean? Your strategy is just a plan, or at its most basic level, a list of activities to identify and assess risk and vulnerabilities, establish policy, implement security controls, and any other activities you and your colleagues will undertake to protect the information assets of your organization. But before you begin identifying what these activities are, you first want to start with the goals of the information security strategy. What do you want your strategy to achieve? Common goals, particularly for regulated industries like financial and health services, could be protecting customer or patient information, compliance with regulatory guidelines, and maintaining business continuity. Again, not an exhaustive list, but you get the idea. And don't forget the illustrious CIA triad, which sounds way sexier than it is. Your information security strategy should aim to establish guidelines, frameworks, and measures to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. That's where the preventative, detective, and corrective controls come into play. For example, you may employ an endpoint tool to prevent users from executing unknown software on their desktops. Great, you've put a control in place, and that does help mitigate the risk of unknown or malicious software, thereby protecting your information assets. But is it working? Are you monitoring it? You'll also want to implement a monitoring plan to ensure you receive metrics on this tool. Are unknown applications actually blocked? How many are being blocked? Are any getting through? This is where program metrics come into play, and is considered another important activity in your strategy. Your strategy can be laid out in a diagram, or in a PowerPoint presentation, or written out in a formal document. As long as it clearly illustrates all the things your organization has elected to carry out to protect your information assets, you have effectively created a strategy. Don't feel like it has to be a perfect solid gold plan. Just start with something rudimentary, and you can improve upon it over time. Creating a strategy is not a one and done activity. It should be a living, breathing process that evolves over time, continually improving. I've laid out a short and sweet blueprint to create a strategy in the description below. Feel free to plagiarize it and make it your own. Okay, so you've got your goals for the information security strategy, and you've got your goals for the business, and you've developed a strategy to execute, right? Now what? Let's cover some common mistakes that organizations and information security managers make when developing and executing a strategy. We've covered some of these already, but if I may highlight a few of these, lack of executive support is a major and very common pitfall that organizations and information security managers encounter. Support for information security and executing strategy must begin at the top, not just to ensure an effective security culture, but because security has an expense, and if you can't get support from the top, then you also likely won't get funding. I'll cover risk assessments in a future video, but one of the fundamental elements to an adequate risk assessment is asset identification. You can't sufficiently assess information risk if you aren't aware of all the information assets. Makes sense, right? Misalignment with business objectives is a topic we have already discussed, but it's an all too common occurrence. And I think it's another one of those phrases or buzzwords that are overly used, and that everyone just takes for granted. Of course, this makes sense, but what does it mean? I'll provide an example that I've seen countless times in many organizations. An information security manager identifies potential risk in an organization and selects a control to mitigate said risk. A great example of this is controlling the outflow of information from your organization using some kind of DLP or content filtering solution. And in general, it's an effective and, more importantly, non-impactful control for the majority of employees. But inevitably, there is an individual or team that performs a business activity that requires some additional permissions beyond what the security control in question allows. If this is a critical business function, then it can interfere with the overall business goals. So, more specifically, a group of salespeople may require access to a website for generating customer agreements or sharing files, but the website is classified too risky given the potential for information to leave the organization, and thus is blocked. If the team that performs this function isn't allowed to use the website, it can result in poor client experience, lost revenue, and ultimately a negative impact on the organization's reputation. That, and if the team isn't allowed to perform the function as needed, they may find a way to circumvent security, which has even more potential for information loss and a full-blown security incident. So you'll want to work closely with this team so that the risk can be properly assessed and the proper permissions can be granted, including some additional training for the sales team. Which is a good segue to employee training. It's absolutely imperative. And I'm not talking about the obligatory compliance training that organizations require employees to complete each month or quarter, but some training on high-level objectives of the information security strategy and how each individual can do their part. Everyone plays a role in information security, but they can't play their part if they don't know their lines. And lastly, efficacy. How do you know that your strategy is working? Monitoring and security metric reviews are a must-do. Too common are metrics glossed over or not reported at all. But the real challenge an information security manager faces is translating those metrics into a meaningful story for senior management to consume. Showing them a bunch of numbers isn't very valuable, and if it's not valued, then it can be difficult to justify expense. I often joke that you want to tell a story in a way to scare senior management.
You want to see something really scary?
Sharing all the potential threats out there and how they apply to your organization, and then use the strategy and metrics to illustrate how the organization is protected. You want to frame it in such a way that senior management has confidence in the strategy, which ultimately serves as an assurance function. Nobody ever said developing information security strategies is easy, but that doesn't mean it has to be overly complex. Ensuring that the goals of the strategy are aligned with the objectives of the business is paramount. And documenting the strategy is nothing more than a plan to implement activities, be it security controls or employee training, that ensure the objectives of the business and the risk therein is managed to an acceptable level. And use resources available to you.
Use my knowledge, I beg you.
To avoid common mistakes. And that's not to say you won't make mistakes. To err is human. But learn from your mistakes and the mistakes of others. Continually improve. I want to thank everyone for watching. Make sure you push all those buttons for more videos on information security, and be on the lookout for my next video on risk assessments. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you next time.